Hello, this is one of two sessions to discuss disruption and innovation across the regulatory and HTA landscape. Please help me welcome first Sylvie Bouchard, who is the Director of Drug Evaluation and Technology Assessment for Reimbursement at INESSS. Sylvie is a hospital pharmacist by profession. She joined the Conseil du Médicament in April of 2010, which later became INESSS in 2011, where she has held various management positions over the years. We also welcome Amanda Allard, who goes by the name of Mandy. Mandy is the Director, Pharmaceutical Reviews at CADTH and has overall responsibility for CADTH's reimbursement review program, which includes oncology and non-oncology drugs. Mandy leads a team that delivers timely, evidence-based reviews of clinical and pharmacoeconomic information, leading to funding recommendations. With over 10 years of experience providing strategic advice for navigating the Canadian drug pricing and reimbursement landscape to pharmaceutical manufacturers, Mandy understands the important role that different forms of evidence play in assessing the value of new medicines. Welcome to you both, and thank you so much for being here. Sylvie and Mandy will lead a discussion on the future of the HTA process, including how they see the evolution of patient and patient group engagement in the process. Thank you again for being here. Sylvie, I'm going to start with you, and I just would love for those in our audience who may not fully understand what you do at INESSS, the role of INESSS, and how you're thinking about some of your current challenges and what some of the immediate solutions are that you have in play to be able to address these challenges.
So as you said before, I'm a pharmacist by training. I'm at INESSS for more than 12 years now. So I've been in leadership with different directorates in INESSS, and now I'm with drug and technology evaluation. So I'll say the big challenges that we are faced to are probably with the period of pandemia and just after pandemia, the access to resources. So we are, as probably many different business in the world, and it's also a real situation in Quebec, that we are faced to the lack of resources, experimental sources, and the capacity of a track and then to keep those resources with us, because there's big opportunities for different persons. And in a more scientific way, I'll say that another challenges is the rapidity or the pressure that is put on our organization to bring recommendations and analysis in a very small, short time. So we have been faced to that in the pandemia, and there's a big needs around that that specific element.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Mandy, I'll ask you the same question in terms of just giving some background on CADTH, your role, and how you see some of the current challenges.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. So CADTH is an independent, not-for-profit organization that's funded by the federal government, as well as the provincial, territorial, and public health ministries. And for a very, very broad description of some of the work that CADTH does is that we conduct health technology assessments to help our decision makers make informed decisions about the optimal use of drugs and medical devices for our healthcare system. And as you mentioned, Anne-Marie, as director of our formulary review program, I have overall responsibility for CADTH's drug reimbursement review program, which includes the non-oncology and oncology drugs, but as well as plasma protein products and cell and gene therapy. So we cover quite a broad range of new medicines. And I think some of the challenges that we're facing, I echo pretty much everything that Sylvie, that you said, in terms of, the resources, our human resources, also time is generally not on our side. As well, we're experiencing a lot of pressure, right, for faster, do more, do it faster. So those are just a few things. I think another thing I'd like to touch on is, over the past years, and especially within the past few months, we've seen an increase in the volume of submissions that are coming our way month over month. And this it does not seem to be falling off. So it seems to be a chronic trend, if you will. And this is, explains part of the reason why we're having these pressures on our resources. But in addition to the sheer volume of work that we're experiencing, are the reviews themselves, they just seem to be becoming more and more complex, right? Because and we're going to get to this. I know we're going to get to this later, and I'm really looking forward to this part of the discussion. But right, the reviews that are coming in, they're coming in with a different type of evidence, right? We're seeing a lot of phase 2 studies, sometimes even the phase 1 studies. So we're trying to incorporate different types of evidence to mitigate that, which of course takes a lot more effort. And we've got a few things that we have been doing to try to deal with these challenges. Of course, one of the things that we're doing is our RWE, real world evidence strategy. We've put a big focus on that. We have a team dedicated to that, and we've publicly announced, a while ago now, that we're in a learning phase. So really preparing ourselves for how to deal with this type of information. What does it really mean? How can we best communicate it? What pieces of it can be most helpful to the decision makers? And I'll stop there because I can go on, but I don't want to hog the conversation.
Thank you very much for your enthusiasm around that. And you went exactly in the right places. So it's almost a perfect storm. We've got a time where resources are tight. The complexity of what you're being asked to do is tremendous. And the sheer volume of development, of innovation is coming together. So, let's start with some of the futuristic or even today's solutions that both of your organizations are considering. You mentioned one, Mandy, which is really the RWE strategy. We can start there. If you have a preferred, if there's other things we'd like, can and should explore as part of this conversation, let's do that now too. Sylvie, maybe you could offer your perspective on what I call, in this concept of perfect storm, volume, low resources, increased complexity. What are some of the future things that your organization is looking on to bridge into what I call more timely access to medications and speeding up the review process?
I'll say that a rapid access to medications for Quebec-based population is for sure a priority for our organization. As many of you are already aware, the Quebec Ministry has signed and renewed the Quebec Life Science Strategy, and in which INESSS is bound to issue recommendation within 30 days of CADTH's recommendations. So, however, as access to patients is driven mostly by negotiation by PCPA, there has been many challenges in the past year, which has delayed the INESSS submissions reviews timeline. I'll say the number of submissions has increased in the last years. The complexity, as Amanda just said, the complexity of dossier has also increased, and we are faced to new paradigm in, let's say, methodology with the introduction of different clinical trials. Let's talk about basket trials. The quality of proof has also changed, as we notice more and more files based on phase 2 studies rather than phase 3. So the level of proof is not the same. On the other hand, INESSS evaluation process has been modified and bonified to take into consideration multiple criteria in the deliberative process. We also perform consultation activities with clinicians, patients, and citizens in some dossiers to benefit the processes and strengthen the evaluation. And finally, in order to ensure the medications access to the population, it remains very important that manufacturers submit files as soon as possible, ideally in parallel to both HTAs with sufficient quality data. And I'm sure that Amanda has something to add to that.
Yeah, Sylvie, you cut out a little bit, and I think you've said something very important because I wanted to get a little bit more color commentary around this consultation process, some of the benefits that and points of guidance that came out of that consultation process, things that you'd like to communicate as part of this conversation that really are bridging into the future of HTA process improvement. What might those be? And I'm sorry, you did cut out just for a moment. The tape is a little bit wobbly here. So could you repeat your requirements from manufacturers around submission of data, please?
Health Canada has reviewed their processes in probably the last 5 or 6 years, and they have implemented different ways to prioritize, I'll say, an evaluation process at the same time for both Health Canada, INESSS, and CADTH. So we encourage the manufacturers to perform their submissions and to make them available as soon as possible for all organizations. So when Health Canada gives the notice of compliance, the HTAs they already have analyzes the data, and they have done consultations, and they are ready to bring recommendations, so that that allows PCPA to go to the negotiation very in a more rapid ways, and then bringing the drugs available or accessible for patients.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you for repeating that. Mandy, do you want to offer some comments that support that?
Yes, certainly. So I guess like in terms of doing things faster, right? You mentioned Anne-Marie, and I think this is something we've already alluded to, but both CADTH and INESSS, as Sylvie mentioned, right? We do have this pre-NOC submission process, and there is the opportunity for manufacturers to sign an information sharing consent form with Health Canada, which basically means that Health Canada can share information during their review with each of our organizations. So this we found through my own personal experience, it really has the potential to really reduce the delays. It's a lot more efficient. We're not waiting on the sponsor to be that sort of go-between. And we've had really great experience with it. And so I personally would just encourage all manufacturers, take advantage of this process. Because we still see that up to half of the submissions that come through our pre-NOC process are not taking advantage of this alignment between Health Canada, INESSS, and CADTH. And I do also want to mention too that I think there's a perception out there that there may be some manufacturers that believe that signing this agreement would ultimately delay the process, right, and result in delays to access. But this is only true in situations, for example, where companies file a submission where it's late and they're not taking advantage of these types of opportunities. And the other thing, I think, like a lot of this success of getting things to market fast, right? It's on both of our ends, right? It's about working together and being transparent, and especially with the pre-NOC submissions, right? we're accepting, we're taking on a bit of a risk, right? Or quite a bit of a risk, right? As we're starting to review drugs for indications that aren't quite firmed up, and there's always the chance that the indication could change, right? And if it changes in such a way, there have been times where the indication has changed and we've had to, go back and almost start our reviews over from scratch. But that's where we're saying if we can work with sponsors, right? And if the sponsors are transparent and let us know about potential changes, we're able to pivot quicker, right? And keep things moving according to schedule.
Yeah, thank you for saying it that way. I love the two-way street, so to speak. I want to bridge now into the concept, and you both touched on it a little bit, but the sheer complexity of what I call the development process, the nature of innovation, everything from biomarkers, companion tests, the various different clinical trials now being in the market, phase 2 trials, all of these things are new and are putting different kinds of pressures on your organizations. I know our audience is going to be curious to know how you're thinking about the future of the process to be able to accommodate all of these innovations as they go forward. So maybe, Sylvie, I could ask you the question first. Knowing this complexity, what happens next in your organization to help accommodate all of this innovation?
We for sure welcome innovation, and it has different faces. So how can we just consider the new things introduced in the new usual way of doing things, and how can we accompany the clinicians and the ministries and all the society to get into that wave without lost all the benefits that we previously had with the actual treatments, for say. So in the last probably near 3 years, we have introduced the assessment concomitantly for the companion test with the oncology drug. So we just want to be sure that when we bring a recommendation to the minister to give access to a drug, the test won't be a barrier to have access to the drug. We have also changed the way we can bring some recommendations. So for some drugs in specific conditions, when we were in rare or ultra rare conditions, when the evolution of that medical condition is long, is not fast, and the condition is mon Dieu, je cherche mes mots. Une condition est grave.
Okay.
On commence. C'est un petit boulot.
That's all right. There's translation services as part of our conference, so feel free.
Okay. So I'll say in the specific conditions, let's talk about a rare or ultra rare condition. When the evolution of that, the prognostic of that medical condition, or the evolution is not fast. When the issue is the fatal one, we have bring some recommendation with promising character or promise of value. So it's a way to introduce drugs, access to drugs for patients in a specific condition. So we want industry or academia or clinicians bring more data in a real world context. So we are talking about real world data and real world evidence, just to see how a drug is what is the experience with that drug in our specific environment, and then to be able, with those clinical data, those real world data, just to be sure that all the uncertainties that were put into consideration in our processes of evaluation were right or no, and what is the final issue. So we see mostly in phase 2 trials. Let's talk about that. For example, we see that there's a signal that there's the drug brings some benefits, but there's a lot of uncertainties about the length of that effect, the magnitude of that effect. And sometimes we have also uncertainties around innocuity or side effects. So real world data can bring precision about those uncertainties, and then 3, 4, 5 years with experience of that drug, we can see if we were right or not, and the conditions of the use of that drug, and even the conditions of negotiating that drug can be changed in time with the access of those informations.
Yeah, thank you. Mandy, maybe you could build on that, because you referenced in your earlier comments the RWD strategy, and it sounds like a good bridge from what Sylvie has been discussing.
Yeah, so we at CADTH, we've got a few things that we're considering, where we're trying to deal and mitigate, right, the uncertainty of the evidence that's associated with, you know, phase 1, phase 2, phase 1 and phase 2 data for these types of innovative products that are coming. Yeah, so we do have our RWE strategy, where we've been working, you know, with various experts. There's been a variety of meetings that have been happening, multi-stakeholder meetings, where we're getting literally, well, I say literally, the best brains in the room. Anne-Marie, you had mentioned we've had the best brains exchange. That was a joint endeavor where we had folks from, it was organized in part by our RWE team, but we also had folks from industry, clinicians, experts really with RWE, and a whole variety of stakeholders. I believe there were also folks from the public drug plans there as well, where people, you know, really got together to figure out or brainstorm some ideas of what evidence is really needed, what can be trusted, and how do we get that evidence? Who holds that evidence? Who analyzes that evidence? How can it be used then to implement certain things? So we're continuing to work on that. We do have, I know RWE as well has been it's you know, it's something that at this point it's still new for everybody, right? And including industry, right? There we hear questions all the time. Well, what do you want from us with this? So CADTH, our RWE team, has been working on putting together some guidance for industry, which will be coming out within the next few months. The draft will be circulated for consultation. So that's coming up, and then hopefully we'll start to see, you know, more standardized types of information coming our way. The other thing I wanted to pick up on is Sylvie, you mentioned your promise of value. And so we've been at CADTH for the last little while. We have been talking about what we're calling time-limited recommendations, right? Because these drugs that come with very low levels of evidence and a lot of uncertainty, you know, sometimes they are associated with a very significant unmet need, right? And we understand that you know, these are being pushed through the system to get these promising therapies through to patients, so patients can start benefiting from them. But it does put, right, you know, the downstream sort of, I guess, us and maybe even the payers, you know, in a tough place, right? Like, do we really know if it really works? Is it going to do what we really say, or what the sponsor is really saying? So we're looking at implementing something sort of like that, but really making sure that we work with, you know, our the payers as well as the PCPA, to make sure that if these types of recommendations come, right, and we start issuing these, can they work with them, right? Because we want to make sure that the whole system is prepared for dealing with these different types of recommendations. So Yeah. So
Thank you.
I have a feeling here we have a lot we can learn from your experience, Sylvie, with this.
Maddie, I hope you don't mind if I pick up on something you've said, is that you're oftentimes asked the question from manufacturers, what do you want from us? And especially in a world where RWD from all kinds of different sources, whether it's from biomarkers, from companion diagnostics, et cetera. So all of those things are at play. Can you give us some early insight on how that question is being framed, what people can expect over the next couple of months? I know you're just formalizing your recommendations, but it would be nice to have a bit of a sneak peek on that.
Yeah.
If you're
so I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, right? By giving too much away. But I think it's about, making sure that the methodologies are robust and being transparent. Again, I already brought up the issue of transparency, but being open, like having an open, dialogue, being clear about the methods that were used, the populations or the registries, which patients were included in those registries, how was all this information actually collected? I'd say that's probably a good starting point. Yeah, and then in terms of, right, the other thing that we're really focused on in terms of trying to mitigate some of this is asking even the sponsors who submit their files, be transparent, right, about the gaps, right? Because if the gaps are identified early on, and I always say, right, like we're going to spend a lot of time and get into the weeds with these files, so we're going to find them. We're going to find those gaps, right? So if you're transparent about them up front, that gives the sponsors an opportunity to provide additional information, right, beyond that of the traditional clinical data to try to fill those gaps where we can get into maybe observational studies or RWE, or where do we need to take a closer look at some patient input or clinician input.
Yeah, perfect. I want to bridge to a conversation on collaboration. Clearly, your two organizations are highly collaborative. I think people really value understanding what some of the critical success factors are around that collaboration. But of course, CADTH has got a new global collaboration with a number of international organizations. What do you hope to achieve out of that? How is that going to benefit the process here in Canada, do you think? So maybe, Sylvie, you can talk about the collaboration between your two organizations, and Mandy, I think everybody is very interested in the benefits of the new global collaboration that you've formed.
So it's been a long time that our both organizations speak to each other. We have regularly exchanges, and we have also I'll say working session, just to well understand the situation of each of our organizations and how can we work, even if it's in a different way, how can we be more clear in the way how can we be more transparent, or can we explain more the way we do things? And we are faced with some issues, so we have also talked about that. Your first comments were about the role of patients, and for sure the role of patients are definitely important in our processes of evaluation of drugs. We have dedicated employees to collect, read, use, and integrate the different feedback that we receive from various means into our evaluations. And I would like to thank associations and patients to take the time to fill the forms and send us messages to voice their needs, their concerns, and detail us the positive and negative impact of current medications that we analyze. And through their letters, we understand the faith and positive impact that they see in the availability and accessibility of the new drugs. So there's definitely a voice for patients and patients associations in the various steps in our processes of drug and technology assessment. And we, for sure, always in a way to better do things, including the collaboration of patients and patients associations.
Thank you for finishing on that note. And Mandy, I'll give you the final word on your global collaboration. It looks like a very big agenda from what I can judge.
Yes, this is no small undertaking, but it's really great that we have multiple international agencies, right? And INESSS is included in this as well. Yeah. But we've got multiple international agencies that that get together. We meet on a quarterly basis, and this is one of the initiatives that we're moving forward. Is how can we collaborate, or is there any opportunities for work sharing across the agencies, right? And at this point, I mean, we're still in the very, very early stages. We've only had a couple meetings, so we're really just at the point of exploring the feasibility of this. But I think I can say at this point, we've all agreed that we're starting with the clinical information, right? And what we're doing is we're really looking for commonalities between, what's submitted and what is filed to each of the organizations to deem or to determine whether or not this is in fact feasible, right? And like, are we getting the same information, right? Are we receiving the submissions at around the same time? So more to come on that, but definitely exciting times for sure.
Thank you very much. What we're learning from this conference in particular is that outside of patients taking center stage, collaboration is really a very recurring theme across so many topics. Thank you so much both for your very dynamic comments. We're going to take some questions from the audience now. Hello, Amanda. Hello, Sylvie. Thank you so much for your presentation. We've got a ton of questions and not a lot of time. I wanted to start by saying that you may in fact have seen it yourself. There was a session just before you, an industry spokesperson as well as somebody who was representing the physician community. And a lot of their conversation was on some of the challenges related to access, and particularly the timeliness of the ability to get drugs to market in this country relative to many other countries in the world. Canada's performance, as you know, is highly challenged to many. So the question on the table really is, so in the spirit of improvement, where in fact can we save time? How can we save time in the process to get faster, better access to drugs for Canadians? I realize it's a big question, and I'm going to put it out to both of you. Sylvie, would you like to start? Or Amanda, would you like to start? Thank you. Please, Amanda.
Yeah.
Please. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start us off. I'll just mention, I've got a lot of ideas, so I'll just mention a couple so I can give Sylvie a chance to respond as well. But I think we've got a few processes in place, right? I think the key takeaways are, if the manufacturers can sign that information sharing consent agreement with Health Canada to participate in that aligned review process, that does help streamline things. File your submissions, pre-NOC with our agencies. That helps move things along. We've had experiences at CADTH where we've been able to issue our recommendation a day after the NOC was granted. So that doesn't happen all the time, but it can show you how it can really speed things along. And engage early. If you have questions, if there's some unique situation that you're dealing with and you're not sure how to approach it, we're here to work with you to make sure that your submission gets accepted and we can review it in a timely manner, which is with as little delay as possible. So Sylvie, I'll let you weigh in as well.
I think you have covered all the main elements on that specific question, but just remember that there's first a decision from a manufacturer to send submissions in different jurisdictions. So sometimes we see that Canada is on the top five jurisdictions who are who receive those files. But there's manufacturers, there's also the regulators, so the pre-NOC and the alignment process from Health Canada are welcome. And then there's HTA, and finally there's negotiations to give access. And don't forget that access is not only by listing or bring a positive recommendation for reimbursement, but there's also different ways to have access. And I'll say the first thing is probably research for patients.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to bridge to another question here, which is, what are some potential strategies for improving patient and patient group input in the HTA processes?
Probably the most important strategy is to include patients in our processes of evaluation. So sometimes there's structured associations of patients that are able to bring resources around the files or the dossier that we analyze. And we also understand that for some associations, it's more difficult to have those kind of access. So for Quebec, we accept comments and different documents from patients and associations of patients in English. So there's no obligation to translate. So that's the first step. And we try at our best to include consultations directly with patients. So focus group or consultation, and sometimes there's discussion from between INESSS and one patient in directly from one-to-one. So we try our best, depending on the disponibility of the resources and our capacity to include that in our process, but we try to do our best to include directly the voice of patients in our processes.
One of the questions that actually came from the other session was there was still a number of questions that are coming in from industry, in particular around the weight between the extent to which you weight a patient perspective in your processes relative to some of the other factors. Any comments around that? The extent to which a patient submission or a patient group submission weighs in your process relative to some of the other factors?
So I can start with that to answer that question. So we involve stakeholder input right throughout our process, and this includes, the patient voice as well. So in terms of the outcomes that are considered important and whether or not they're meaningful, we look to patients to help provide that information. So it's hard to say, relative to the evidence, right? But we do make sure to incorporate it. And you can see within the CADTH recommendations, we do have, we have started incorporating a specific paragraph within the reason for the recommendation to reflect on what we heard from the patients and whether or not the evidence reviewed does meet those patient needs.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mandy. And this is a bridge from that thought, which is a question. I'll read it directly. When it comes to stage 4 terminal patients, why does it take so long to make a decision regarding compassionate use? If a patient is willing to try a drug not yet approved in Canada, why can't they sign off on it and simply try it?
As I've said earlier, there's different ways to have access to drugs. We know and we understand in some situations the emergency to have those access. But we are faced to different elements that are not all under our control. So, and I think that the big reason for that is that we are not doing medicine or pharmaceutical services. We are an HTA, and we have a global or societal approach. So the way we process our different actions are different when a patient is in the office in face-to-face with a doctor.
Thank you. I know we're running out of time, but there's at least 3 questions that are of a similar nature, and it's really about what I call the collaboration between INESSS and CADTH. And it was highlighted in a previous session that sometimes you make different decisions about the same drugs. And what is the reconciliation process? I'm sure you're both very aware that that happens. What are the procedures, ways in which you are collaborating to eliminate those different decisions based on a similar HTA submission?
Nadine, you want to start?
Sure, I can start with that. So the first thing is to recognize that CADTH and INESSS, we operate under different rules, if you will, right? CADTH represents, 14 to 16 public drug plans, while INESSS, works mainly with RAMQ. Sylvie, I'm sorry, I might be doing this a disservice, but the first thing is to recognize that. So ultimately, the needs may be slightly different, right? We do review each drug in our own context, but I will share that we did have a meeting between our 2 organizations very recently, as recent as last week. So this is hot off the presses, and we did actually take a look at some of the recommendations where our organizations differ, right? Because this is something concerning to us as well. And what we realized was that both of our committees, and we looked at some recommendations for oncology and non-oncology drugs. And in the cases where the recommendations differ, it wasn't on the interpretation of the evidence.
Yeah, because even if we are submitted to the same level of proof and the same studies and the same trials or results that emerge from those trials, we present the old proof to different scientific committee. So those are constituted by humans that have their own cultural and values. So they can appreciate the proof in a different way. And as Mandy says, in Quebec, it's probably easier for us because we do analyze the proof and evaluate the value with directly with something that is already reimbursed in the system. So it's maybe sometimes explain the differences between the kind of recommendations that each of our organization brings. But at the end, when we look at the different arguments or elements that are put on the table, we're not that far.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I'm going to have to end it there, but I wanted to, again, thank both of you for bringing your perspectives to the table. I would say this is a hot topic, and given the future of cancer treatments, companion diagnostics, et cetera, it's only going to get hotter. And so we're going to look forward to further collaborations with both of you. Thank you again so much for your time and for joining us for this Q&A.